Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I'm going to be sharing every single unread book from my shelves. A few weeks ago I mentioned that I don't keep track of any of the books that I have unread because of it filling me with some sort of anxiety and then this need to rid myself of books. However, my friend Lily of Lykios Reads has been asking for a bookshelf tour for years, and I'm not the biggest fan of them, but I have been interested in doing something like this before, and so I thought it's as good a time as any. So I will be sharing a clip of my shelves, and then I will be showing you what books are on there still to read. I suppose I was also inspired to do this by Adam over at Memento Mori talking about his shelves, and his are organised alphabetically. His is quite the fascinating video to go and watch into how we curate our bookshelves. Personally, this first shelf that I am going to be sharing with you is because these shelves were my parents' bookshelves, and when I began to read more and needed more space to keep my books, they were put in my bedroom. They are currently attached to the walls and seem to be coming away, but each of the bookcases has a top shelf that is considerably larger than the bottom two shelves, and thus this is the place where all of my tall hardbacks have to go, despite the fact that I would quite like an alphabetical bookcase. From the shelf, I only have two books to read, and the first of them is We Cast a Shadow by Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I purchased this book after hearing Russell over at Ink and Paper blog talk about it earlier in the year. I suppose it's going to be a look at racism in America and indeed the world. So Roxane Gay called it satire. It's been blurbed similar to Franz Kafka, and I really should have read this by now. Next, we have The Old Drift by Namwali Serpell. I got a Kindle edition of this off NetGalley because I was really interested in this family saga set in Africa, Zambia to be specific, and all it is I've been a bit intimidated by the length of this one. So only two books off that shelf, which is actually quite good, and I wish I could say the same for the next shelf. The next shelf is my first double stacked shelf, and off the first row of that I don't actually have many books in which to read. Because it's double stacked, there are things hidden behind there and I want to forget that they are there. Firstly, we have Melmoth by Sarah Perry. I meant to read this in October last year and haven't got around to it. I think people didn't like this as much as the Essex Serpent, which was one of the reasons I got it, because I didn't like the Essex Serpent as much as other people seem to, so I thought that that would be a good thing going into Melmoth. This was on my March TBR and we are now in July, and there's part of me that thinks maybe I should just save it until October again. Next we have The Doll Factory by Elizabeth Macneal, and I got this after watching Simon of Savage Reads do his video with the author, and I'm currently 120 pages in, but because of other things I wanted to read it got pushed to the wayside. Then we have the latest book added to my collection, and that is Patsy by Nicole Dennis-Benn. Had I known that I still had this on pre-order from Amazon, I would have cancelled it because I completely disagree with the packaging they use. They put this in a huge box so as the corners around here are all battered, but what can you do? Basically, I adore Nicole Dennis-Benn's first book, Here Comes the Sun, and so as soon as I found out that she had a second one coming out, I pre-ordered it. I have no idea what it's about, but I'm looking forward to it, and I can guess that it's going to be amazing if her debut novel is anything to go by. Then we move on to the books behind the hardcovers, and these are some books that I don't think I'm going to be reading. The first being this Dictionary of Word Origins by Linda and Roger Flavell, and this was gifted to me by a friend, and it's just a load of weird words, but because it's a gift I feel like I ought to read it at some point, but also it's a dictionary. How many people actually read dictionaries? Next we have The Night Watch by Sarah Waters. I got this book from the charity shop. I have now read The Little Stranger and The Paying Guests, but I do think that I'm going to save this book for the autumn because I found that I much prefer her books then. And then we had another gift, which was this literary trivia, which is just like a quiz for if you're a fan of literature, I suppose. Again, I don't think that I'm actually going to be taking time out of my day to read this one from cover to cover. Next, we're on to the third shelf, and there are definitely a lot more books unread on this shelf. Obviously, this is because we have more books on the shelves, but it is also a double-stacked one, and the first one we're going with is the collected stories of T.C. Boyle, and this is actually the second collection of them. It's quite humongous at 915 pages. Again, this was a gift. Again, I'm not really interested in it, but I feel as though I will have to read it at some point. I have no idea whether I'll get on with T.C. Boyle's writing style. Feel free to let me know whether you do or whether you think that they're not worth my time. It's a nice cover. Then I have the Forward Book of Poetry 2017 and the Forward Book of Poetry 2018, and they're just poetry collections, and I'll get round to them one day. And then we have Dracula by Bram Stoker. I purchased this book when I first went to Whitby in 2013. This was the edition I really wanted of this book. I think that I'm going to enjoy it. I did get 40 pages into it, and it's just one of those that, again, I'm going to be saving till October because I think like Halloween, but I do this all the time. Maybe I should read it sooner rather than later. We will see. Then we've got another gift, and that is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. No idea what the book's about. I know I looked at it as a teenager, and a lot of teenage boys who are into literature have read this one, but I wasn't one of those people. Then we have a book that I unhauled, but then I got it back from the charity shop, and that is Swansong by Kerry. This has something of the fairy tale element to it. It's set in Scotland. I feel as though I have an affinity to the story despite having not read it yet. Then we have Lanny by Max Porter. This is a relatively new addition to my shelves. I have absolutely no idea what half of these books are about anymore. Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. I believe this follows a girl, Sunny, who finds out that she has some magical powers. She's albino, living in Nigeria from New York City. She finds out she's got some magical powers, and I believe it's going to be dealing with feeling other. Then we have A Wonderful Stroke of Luck by Beattie, purchased entirely because of the cover, and I think that it is a campus novel. Now we're moving on to the books that were behind these, still on the third shelf though, and the first is Heidi by Johanna, and I will never be reading this. This was my great-grandmother's copy of this book that I was gifted upon her death 20 years ago, and I'm keeping it simply because it's something of the heirloom. Then we have The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. Katie over at Books and Things talks about this book often. She did a read-along last year. Apparently this is a great book if you're a lover of books. I can't say more than that, having not read it and having not really glanced at the blurb before now. Then we have the new selected poems of Seamus Heaney. I took this to Rome with me in 2015 with the intention of going to each different landmark, opening the pages wherever they landed and reading that poem. However, there were so many people in Rome who would come up to you if you stopped to try and sell you something like selfie sticks and flowers and stuff you never need, so that never happened, and I still haven't read this one. Then we have the first 4 books in the Earthsea saga by Ursula K. Le Guin, and this was one of my Willoughby Book Club books from last year. The book is somewhat damaged, so that's why I've not read it, which is a terrible reason not to read them. Nothing fantastical in here. I did consider giving this book to my cousin. We will see how I feel later on in the year. And then another Willoughby Book Club was The Princess Bride by William Goldman. I was going to unhaul this book earlier this year, but I decided to give it a chance because some people do seem to enjoy this. It's quite famous. I don't know anything about it. I believe it's some sort of adventure novel, but honestly, I have never had an interest in this book before, and had the Willoughby Book Club not sent it to me, I probably never would have picked it up myself. Then we're moving on to my next bookcase, the one underneath the first one, which I worry about if these do collapse and fall away from my walls, because then these are definitely going to die. And so The first shelf, again, is one of those bigger shelves, so it's where all of my taller fantasy novels go. I've read quite a lot of them, so there are only 2 books on this shelf still unread, and they are both by Sebastian de Castell. They are Soulbinder and Queenslayer. These are the 4th and 5th book in the Spell Slinger series, and I'm planning on reading them this month as part of Rachel Marie's Book Junkie Trials. They follow the character of Callan and the squirrel cat Rikus, who is also his business partner. There is little more I can say other than that now without spoiling the very first book in the series. Then we are moving down to my children's fiction shelf. Again, despite the fact that this is a double stacked shelf, I only have 2 books to read on here, which are both new purchases. The first of them is Melamander by Thomas Taylor. Now, I wanted to read this book, and then my friend Lily recommended it, and then I saw Gavin of Gavin Hetherington recommend it as well. And again, I can't remember what this book is about. There's something to do with mermonkeys on the back and some kid called Herbie Lemon. I can't remember what interested me, but I'm still excited to get to this book. I do enjoy good middle grade fiction, and this is promising me great things. And then we have The Garden of Lost Secrets by A.M. Howell. This young girl called Clara has been sent to stay with her aunt and uncle during the First World War, and there seems to be some mystery, some intrigue, and it was recommended to me, so I got it. Now we're moving on to the final shelf on this wall, and this is where we have our most unread books because of the 2 series in particular. They are the Agatha Raisin series and Poirot's series. And basically I acquire them as they come into the charity shop, but then I don't read them. So I'll go through the Agatha Raisin books first. They are all by M.C. Beaton, and we have Agatha Raisin His and Hers, Agatha Raisin Something Borrowed, Someone Dead, Blood of an Englishman, The Witch's Tree, and The Dead Ringer. Way back in 2011, I read the majority of the Agatha Raisin books that were out then, and then I reached a point where I was reading 3 of them a day, and I just got a bit fed up of them, and I've never gone back, but there is something that compels me to purchase the books whenever I see them in the charity shop, which is why I've got all of these. I'm going to be reading As the Pig Turns for my coordinated TBR, and then I'm hoping to finish these by the end of the year, if only so that I can say I have another shelf of read books. Then we move on to the Agatha Christie books that I have, and they are Dumb Witness, The Hollow, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, Murder on the Orient Express, The Clocks, and Hercule Poirot's Christmas. The only reason I haven't got to them is because I don't particularly care for Poirot as much as I did Miss Marple. I might rectify that by the end of the year. Quite honestly, when I pulled my books away to check what I had double stacked, I was surprised to find all this Poirot there, which is never a good sign. And then I have 2 of the British Library crime classics, which are The Incredible Crime and The Santa Claus Murder. This one I'm saving for Christmas, along with Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Now we are moving on to the 3rd bookcase, which only has 3 shelves, but I'm having to use the top of it as a 4th because I have too many tall hardbacks nowadays. So let's just get into the first shelf on there, which gives us A Winter's Promise by Christelle Davos. Yeah, this is featured in my coordinated TBR, so I'm definitely going to be getting to this one this year and then maybe reading the sequel. Then we have Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. This is not my copy. This is a friend's copy that I have now had for nearly 10 years, and I definitely ought to give back to her. I have got my own copy from the charity shop now, so that just needs to happen. Then we have Sheepwrecked by Jackie Moffat, and basically, my nan died last year, and she had some books, so I've got this one, and I planned to read it, and I didn't, but if Non-Fiction November happens again, I could read this one. Then we have another gift, which is Listening to the Animals by Noel Fitzpatrick. This was a gift from my manager, which I'm pretty confident I gave to her the year before. Basically, she doesn't seem to realise that I don't like water-damaged books, and then she accidentally spilt something on it. Also, just because I'm a farmer's son doesn't mean I'm interested in reading books about animals. So this will probably sit on my shelf until November, when I eventually just decide to throw it on my November TBR for non-fiction. Then we have my shelf of Robin Hood books, and that's a shelf where every single book on there is read, so I don't have to worry about that one. And then we move to the next shelf down, and I have Red Seas Under Red Skies by Scott Lynch, the second book in the Gentleman Bastards series. And I actually unhauled this book earlier this year, then repurchased it from the charity shop before it could get thrown into our rag bag, and now looks like I'm going to have to read it at some point. We have Clariel by Garth Nix, and I was watching Kat over at Brews and Reviews talk about Sabriel, the first book in this series, and I remembered how difficult it was to get into that book, and I have now, I've had this book for about 5 years, and I still haven't read it, and I keep forgetting I own it, and I keep forgetting I've not read it, and I keep forgetting it's on the shelf, and yeah, I'm going to read it at some point, maybe, probably, possibly, hopefully. Then we move to our next shelf down, and so this is the final shelf on that wall, and this is where we have the leftovers from our young adult reading. So we have Fairest by Marissa Meyer and Stars Above by Marissa Meyer. I enjoyed the Lunar Chronicles when I read them, so I purchased these books, and I still have never got around to reading them. I might rectify that at some point. Next we have another book on my coordinated TBR, which is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. We can see that I actually got 50 pages in before I put this book down 3 years ago. So I'm hoping to finish this series this year, and then I can have another empty shelf. I've got The Dream Thieves, Blue Lily Lily Blue, and The Raven King to get through. Then we're going to move to this shelf above my head. And these books have got very dusty, so they're currently in my window. We have The Lost Story of the Ocean Monarch by Jill Hoffs. I've known Jill for a few years now. We did an author panel together when I first bought Our Doris out, and so I probably should have read this book by now because I've enjoyed her previous 2 books. I like the way she writes non-fiction. She finds these tragedies that have probably been forgotten because everyone thinks of Titanic as the biggest shipping tragedy that we've had. I know that this was hinted at in The Lost Story of the William and Mary, so I know that I want to read it. It's just I put it on my shelf and forgot about it. So I'm very apologetic to Jill about that one, especially as I was sent this book free by the publisher. Then we have Runelight by Joanne Harris. This has a much better cover now to match the Gospel of Loki and the Testament of Loki, and I wish I had this cover, but I got it when it first came out, and I've never read it because I hate the cover. Also, I felt when I was reading it that there are a lot of things in here that weren't that meant I would have to go back and reread Rune Marks before I read Runelight, and they're not the greatest books in the world. I appreciate them for their retelling of Norse mythology, and I like Joanne Harris's humour, but then we have a book that I'm disappointed in myself for still having not read, and that is The Rabbi's Cat 2 by Johan Svar. If you know me, the first time, when I first started this channel, I could not stop going on about the first graphic novel in this series because I adored it so much. I recommended it to everybody, and it still stands the test of time as one of my favourite graphic novels. So it disappoints me that I haven't read this one yet. It's basically about this cat who gains the ability to talk, and the first thing he does is lie. It goes into talk about religion and people's relationships with one another. It's a great philosophical graphic novel, and I ought to get to this one. I have seen the film, so I did get part of this spoiled for me because it puts the 2 books together, but that still doesn't stop Johan Svar being one of my favourite artists and writers. Then we have The Life of Our Lord by Charles Dickens. This is Charles Dickens' take on biblical stories that he wrote for his children. I had no intention of reading this book, but it came into the shop, and rather than have it thrown away, I purchased it. I might read it at some point, maybe Christmas. Maybe I'll read this alongside A Christmas Carol, because we all know how I feel about religion, but I don't seem to have a problem with the Bible, although if Exodus is in here, I might get terrified. Now you might think that that's all my shelves done, but then we have books that have yet to make it to my shelves. If you have watched my video about you choosing what I unhaul, which you were all very unhelpful with because I still have all the books because nobody could tell me what to throw away, then you will have seen all the books that aren't yet on my shelves. However, there are some that currently aren't on my shelves because they're on a TBR, and some that I just discovered that I would like to share because I have a problem with purchasing books from the charity shop. Firstly, we have the books that are on my coordinated TBR, so they are Reservoir 13 by John McGregor, The Wellworth Beauty by Michelle Roberts, and Liminal by B. Lewis. These next books I thought I had unhauled, but for whatever reason they're still here, and they are The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy and The Gustav Sternata by Rose Tremaine. I got these because they were popular and they came into the shop, and I don't know that I'm going to read them, so if you think I should, then let me know, but if I shouldn't, then I will probably unhaul them. However, I do keep getting told to read Rose Tremaine. Then we have another British Library crime classic, and that is The Lake District Murder by John Bude. And I like these stories sometimes, so I like classic crime. It seemed like a good purchase. Then I got given this book to read in non-fiction November 2017 and never read it, and that is The Snow Geese by William Fiennes. Here we have A Grand Old Time by Judy Lee, which is subtitled Life Begins at 75, and it's about this older lady who escapes her retirement home and decides to go on a big adventure across Europe. It seems somewhat similar to The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, and if you've read my books, you know that I also appreciate older characters. Then we have Nights at the Circus by Angela Carter. I discovered this book at the charity shop last week, so immediately had to buy it. I really like Angela Carter's work, and this is one that I don't have. Then we have Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King. I featured this in my horror book tag video because this was a book that Dane recommended that I read if I wanted to get into Stephen King, if I wanted to get into the horror genre. Currently it's more of a thriller than a horror, but I'm enjoying getting 40 pages in. I'm planning a video later on this month in which I'm going to be discussing Mr. Mercedes by Stephen King, but as it was recommended by Dane, I'm also going to be reading his book formally, and Dane recommended this one because he knows I have a problem with horror, and he says that this is the least horror of all of his books, but I think that it'd be nice not to compare this with Mr. Mercedes, but to discuss a book that was recommended by an author and then review one of the author's own books. So you should be getting that later on in July. And them's the books. There are a lot more books here to read than I had anticipated. I definitely know that I won't have read them all by the end of the year, but it is my hope to one day reach the point where I can recommend all of the books on my shelves. If whilst seeing the portions of my shelves you saw a book you wanted me to talk about more in depth, then let me know in the comments and I will do that. If you recommend that I read any of these books sooner rather than later, tell me which ones I ought to read and ought to make a priority. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.